You never notice the smallest sounds until they're the only things you can hear. When I say 4 chilling, true childhood Home Alone stories, I mean exactly that. 4 nights, 4 kids, 4 times ordinary rooms flipped into threat. These are real memories, raw, imperfect, and still sticky in my head years later. If anything here feels close to your own experience, please take a moment for yourself. This is honest, and it can be hard to listen to.
I remember the glow of the TV coloring the doorway, and a shadow cutting through that glow as someone walked in front of the light on their way across the room. They opened the entertainment center. A whisper of metal, the clack of a DVD case, the clenching of zipper teeth. I remember thinking I should shout, I should scream, but there was this tiny, childish logic. Maybe if I stay absolutely silent, they'll think there's no one here. My hands were white on the hanger. My mind oscillated between action and this stupid, paralyzing freeze. They were inside my house. They were in the room where my mom and dad's picture hung. They moved slowly, one hand trailing along the back of the couch like someone trying not to wake a sleeping animal. Then, a harder sound, like something being dragged behind them. My coat, the sound slithered toward the hallway, and then the front door. I waited and listened to the faucet in the kitchen click, and my heart recalibrate to a new pace. The person left. The door shut. Everything after that was quick, and then slow. My brother came back eventually, later than he should have, and when my parents got home the next morning, we walked through the house and found drawers pulled out, my parents' laptops gone, our TV missing. The living room felt emptied, violated in a way that didn't make sense to a 12-year-old. I remember the police taking notes and speaking so quietly they might as well have been reading off a script. Zach said he left the door unlocked because he'd just be gone 5 minutes. My dad's face turned a certain gray I had never seen. My mother folded her hands and didn't cry until she left the room to call someone. I had hidden in a closet while someone went through our things. I carried that image with me for years, the sensation of being the exact opposite of safe in the place that should have been safest. Every creak in a house made me think of those footsteps. I learned the vocabulary of suspicion: hinge warp, forced entry, pry marks. I learned to check locks, to wedge chairs by doors, to sleep with a light on. Later, when friends came over and left doors unlocked, I felt a surge of anger I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the stolen items. It was about the violation of the ordinary. I still sometimes replay that night in my head, sitting in the closet with my knees to my chest, hearing something that told me the world was not as protected as I thought. If you like true scary stories, hit subscribe. That night set the tone for how I viewed the rest of these memories, how quickly the familiar can turn dangerous. But the next story is different. It isn't an anonymous intruder in the dark. It's someone who should have been trusted, because he was known. That shift, when the threat comes from a familiar face, is its own kind of horror. I was very young for the second story.
I was staying with my grandparents because my parents were away, indefinite on why, because that part of the memory has always been fuzzy. What I remember is the smell of my grandmother's perfume and the loud tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway that made the whole house feel like it was breathing. The house had a porch that caught the summer light like a net. Neighbors wandered over sometimes. One of those neighbors was David. He used to wave from across the street, and he entertained us with jokes when the grown-ups were outside. To me, he was an adult who sometimes brought candy. Familiar faces can feel like anchors in a small child's world. One afternoon, the air thick and heavy, David came over. At first, it looked like a normal visit. He'd been drinking, which I didn't understand yet, and his words slurred the way cartoons look when they're stretched. He laughed too loudly and leaned on the lamp in the living room. The house felt small around him, as if he filled too much space for the furniture to breathe. He asked about my parents. He asked where everyone was. The grown-ups, my grandparents, were in the kitchen. I remember sunlight on the counter. I remember the clink of dishes. Then things changed too fast for me to process. David's mood shifted. The jokes didn't land. He reached inside his coat, and there was something metallic that caught the light, small and sharp. I didn't know it was a knife in the way I understand it now. I just knew that his smile fell away, and something dangerous took its place. He looked at me and said things that made my chest hollow out. He was close, too close. There was a smell of beer and old cigarette smoke, and something else, anger. My grandmother came into the room and froze, her hands finding the edge of the counter. My grandfather, who had been in the other room, pushed his chair back and moved with a kind of urgency I'd only seen in old Western movies. What happened next is one of those memories that's a collage. My grandfather grabbing David's arm, a scuffle, my grandmother screaming, and everyone's voices turning into one continuous noise. I was kept on the couch, wrapped in a blanket like I was fragile china. My grandpa fought to get David out the door and into the yard, and then, with shaking hands, he shut and locked the door behind him. It's possible that in the minutes after, my grandparents told me to go to my room and sleep, to act like nothing had happened, but I remember lying awake that night, feeling my heart beat against the mattress. Later, I learned that no charges were brought. It was complicated. People knew each other, the police took statements, and David disappeared from our lives in a way that left more questions than answers.
My grandparents told me not to talk about it to my parents until they got back, and maybe that was to protect me. Maybe it was to protect them. I learned, in a way a child does, that people who are supposed to be safe can be the opposite.
Familiarity offered a false security. That memory sits like a bruise under the skin whenever I think about who we let in, even when we think we can read people. The lesson wasn't simple. It didn't translate to never trust anyone you know. It translated into a cautious, small voice inside my head that always checked twice. When a neighbor called late at night, I answered differently. When a friend wanted to take me somewhere, I said no once, twice, until I trusted the feeling. The betrayal in that story isn't theatrical. It's quiet, a subtle erosion of innocence. I still sometimes imagine the way my grandpa looked when he slammed the door and then stared at his hands. He was protecting me with a ferocity that felt like love, and that image is braided with the fear. The third story is one I always find myself replaying when I think about how instincts work. I was 15 during spring break 2020. That week felt strange for lots of reasons. The world was on edge, and itineraries were disrupted. My brother and a couple of friends, Mason and Neil, were staying at our house for a few days. Neil had been experimenting with drugs, the kind of things that make people float into bad places in their minds. I had seen him at school the week before. His eyes didn't sit right in his face. He laughed too loud at quiet things and then would sink into silence. I didn't want to be cruel. I didn't want to make him feel like an outsider. So when Mason asked if Neil could crash on our couch one night, I agreed, mostly because I didn't want to be the one who refused a friend. That decision haunted me in ways I couldn't have predicted. Neil arrived late. He reeked like a combination of perfume and something sharp and chemical. He was unusually quiet, and then, out of nowhere, he started talking about things that didn't connect, pieces of memory stitched wrong. The house felt smaller with him in it. At some point, he went into the kitchen and took out a knife from a drawer where my mother kept the utensils. I saw it flash in his hand like a signal. The next part happened in the way emergencies do, too slow to begin with, then suddenly fast. He held the knife and took a step toward me with a blank look, like someone watching himself in a mirror where he didn't quite belong. For a moment, I thought he might be messing around. Maybe it was a stupid prank, I told myself. Then he turned that direction into an intent, and the laughter in his face died. I felt something in me sharpen, a tool I didn't know I had. I couldn't reason with him. Words would not work. The correct rational response would have been to run, but our house had a corridor that opened to the back door, and the side gate was locked from the outside. There wasn't a clean exit. I remember tapping into a kind of basic math. Him, knife, me, body. Time converted into decisions. I edged toward the kitchen door and tried to keep my voice steady.
I told him, calmly, that we should go outside, that the night air would make him feel better. I don't know why he listened. Maybe the drugs made him gullible to any movement. Maybe he wanted to prove something. Maybe he was already so unmoored that any suggestion could anchor him. My brother and Mason moved behind me, a quiet backup. We guided him to the door like shepherds trying not to spook a wild animal. When we got to the porch, I remember the click of the bolt as we locked it behind him, the metallic, almost tiny sound that suddenly felt like armor. We told him he had to leave, stay away, get help. He looked at us with the kind of fractured recognition that made my stomach pitch. We called for help, phones, parents, someone. My brother and the other friends managed to get Neil out of the neighborhood. Later, I heard that the episode was linked to the drugs he'd been taking, and that he was hospitalized for a short period. I felt relief and guilt at the same time. Relief that my instincts had pushed me to act. Guilt that a friend of mine had been in a place where a small decision could have gone disastrously wrong. The memory of the knife was less about the metal and more about the pivot point, the moment when a normal night almost tipped into something permanent. That night taught me the importance of trusting that small internal alarm. It taught me that courage isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's a dull, stubborn insistence on safety. It also taught me something about compassion, about how fragile the line can be between someone you like and someone who is dangerous to themselves and others because of their choices or their illness. I've told that story more than once to friends when they joke about not being able to handle weird situations. I don't tell it to make people fearful. I tell it to try to show how intuition, quick thinking, and a hard, practical action, locking a door, calling someone, can make a difference. The last story is one that I find the hardest to stop thinking about, because it sits in the place between daylight and the night, between sight and the sense that someone else could be moving within the house while you think you're alone. I was 10. It was early evening and I was out on the driveway playing basketball. The rhythmic thump of the ball against asphalt is a small, repetitive comfort. It feels like control when a kid can't control much else. The neighborhood was quiet, summer quiet, the kind of silence that makes the clink of a swing set sound loud. I glanced up and saw a shadow at my sister's upstairs window. At first I thought it was the curtain, or a reflection, but then it moved in a way that made me stop mid-dribble. I remember the way static cut across the world. The ball bounced and the echo sounded too loud. I ran to the back of the house and into the kitchen, shouting my sister's name. She wasn't there. The door to her room was closed.
I could see the outline of a figure through the curtain, just a dark shape, and it felt wrong, like a piece of a jigsaw in the wrong place. My parents were supposed to be home soon. I called them, voice shaking so badly the operator asked if I was crying. The police came and did a sweep. They found nothing that night, a negative search, hearts racing and then calming a little when the house was empty. We all tried to be rational. Perhaps it was a neighbor walking by. Perhaps it was a trick of light. Still, I couldn't unsettle the feeling that someone had been there, had looked in on our lives and then slipped away. That night, I slept in my sister's room because she wanted the company. I woke up to a whisper of movement across the floor. At first I thought it was the house settling, but then I felt the air change, the room colder near the foot of the bed. I opened my eyes and there was indefinite on how long he'd been standing there, because that part always floats in memory. Someone at the end of my bed. Not a shadow. A person. I was half asleep and the world seemed one step removed from me. My brain did that thing where it tries to turn disbelief into other things. Was it a dream? Had I sleepwalked? The rational counterthoughts were frantic and thin. Then the figure moved, not violently, but as if startled by something I could not yet name. I screamed. The scream was not the petulant kid scream I'd used before. It came out like a raw animal sound from somewhere deep. The person fled. No struggle, no confrontation. They bolted. My parents rushed in. They checked doors again. The neighbor's presence the week before came up in the conversation, as did 1,000 small anxieties about locks and how long someone could be inside a house before being noticed. We filed a report. The police came more than once. They canvassed the neighborhood and told us what they could, the normal things about the difficulty of proving a silent intruder, about the limits of clues when someone leaves nothing behind. I kept thinking about how long that person had been in my room. Had they looked at me? Had they watched me sleep for minutes or hours? Those questions weren't answered, and the uncertainty is worse than clear answers are sometimes. The knowing that something could have been different, that a slight change could have turned the night upside down, became an undercurrent in my life after that. I remember soon after we put a little nightlight by the doorway, the kind that casts a soft halo across the floor. It was a small childish thing, but it felt like a talisman. When I would wake up in the dark, that faint pool of light on the hardwood made me feel like I had reclaimed a sliver of safety. Over time, I learned to check windows and doors before falling asleep. I learned not to assume that the house's silence meant I was alone. That uncertainty, the what if, is what has haunted me longest. All 4 stories have that in common. A simple action, hiding, running, locking a door, screaming, made the difference. None of these kids were heroes in a movie sense. They were children reacting as best they could to the immediate sensations of fear. Their choices were small but consequential. There's a thread that weaves through these nights, the ordinary noises that become warnings, the adults who don't always see what a child knows, and the strange, complicated way familiarity can either comfort or betray you. Childhood is built on a scaffolding of trust. When that scaffolding shakes, everything else feels unstable. That's the core of why these memories linger. They're not only about the intruders or the men with knives. They're about the dissolving of a certain kind of safety we assume when we're small. If you take anything from these stories, let it be that instincts matter. They are not melodrama. They are the body's shorthand for danger. If your stomach tightens, if a voice in your head says something's off, treat it like a signal. Check your doors, call someone, make noise. These aren't glamorous instructions, but they're what kept these kids safe. Also, if you've experienced something similar, you're not alone. The aftermath is often quieter than the event itself and harder to speak about. Trauma doesn't look like one thing. It can be small habits like triple checking a lock, or large patterns like an anxiety that sits just under your usual mood. That's normal. You can seek help. You can take small precautions without becoming consumed by fear. To anyone who's listening and has a story of their own, if you grew up home alone and felt unsafe, or if something happened and you've held it close, please share it in the comments. These memories matter, not just because they're scary, but because they teach us what small actions can keep us safe. And if this creeped you out, subscribe for more true accounts like these, stories that try to hold both the fear and the humanity of the people who lived them. We tell these stories because they haunt us, and because haunting is not always a passive thing. It can be a teacher. It can be the reason you decide to install better locks, to teach your kids a few crucial phrases about not opening the door, to listen when someone younger than you says they're scared. Childhood memories have a strange gravity. They pull the rest of your life into alignment, and sometimes that alignment makes you wiser, quieter, more cautious. That's not bad. It's practical survival. I'll leave you with an image that keeps returning to me: the small pool of light from a nightlight on a hardwood floor. It was a silly thing to feel safe with, but it was real. It was a choice to take back a little bit of control after a moment when everything felt out of control.
If you take anything from these 4 stories, 4 true childhood nights where home alone became a different kind of threat, let it be that small acts can matter, instincts are worth trusting, and the stories we carry can teach the people who come after us. Share your story in the comments if you feel able, and if you want more true accounts that listen to the people who lived them, subscribe. Thank you for staying with these 4 stories. Stay safe.